The dictator is not Africa's enemy. Ibrahim Traoré exposes the real threat. In Africa today, the people's greatest enemy is not the dictator. It is the delay, the endless waiting, the promises that never arrive, the dreams buried under paperwork, tenders, and procedures. What use is freedom, they ask, if it cannot deliver bread, jobs, and dignity on time? This is the crisis shaking Africa today. The dictator may silence voices, but the delay kills hope. And in this vacuum of frustration, a new fever has risen, one that worships speed, action, and boldness. They call it Traorism fever. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a name that no longer belongs only to Burkina Faso. It is whispered in the villages of Mali, shouted in the streets of Niger, and debated in the halls of power across Africa. In less than 2 years, he has gone from a little-known officer to a symbol of defiance, and for millions, a symbol of hope. When the coup of 2022 unfolded, the world thought they had seen this story before. Another military man, another uniform, another strong man promising to save the nation, only to cling to power and betray his people. But Traoré surprised them. He didn't arrive with just a hunger for the throne. He arrived with an agenda. The first thing he touched was the untouchable, the mining contracts. For decades, Burkina Faso's gold and uranium flowed out of the soil straight into the hands of foreign corporations, while ordinary Burkinabés struggled to feed their families. Traoré stood before his people and declared, "This land is ours. Its wealth belongs to our children. No longer will our resources be taken while our people remain poor." That one statement sent a shockwave through the nation. For years, people had watched trains and trucks loaded with their gold heading to foreign ports while their villages had no electricity, no hospitals, no future. Suddenly, here was a leader saying out loud what they had been whispering for generations. And it wasn't just talk. What made Traoré different was not his speeches, but his speed. Where other leaders formed endless committees, Traoré made decisions overnight. Where others hid behind bureaucracy, he cut straight through. If a policy was announced on Monday, it was being enforced on Tuesday. This decisiveness struck like lightning. To some, it was dangerous. To many more, it was thrilling. It reminded people of Thomas Sankara, the legendary Burkinabé president of the 1980s, who had once declared war on corruption, colonialism, and dependency. Sankara had been assassinated before his revolution could fully bloom. Today, people say, Sankara's blood runs again in Traoré, and so a fever began to spread. They call it Traorism fever. But what is it really? Is it just a cult of personality, one man elevated by desperation? Or is it something deeper, a response to decades of betrayal, poverty, and empty promises? Think of it this way. What happens when a people wait for decades for progress that never comes? What happens when a farmer watches his land's gold shipped to Europe while his own house is lit by a single candle? What happens when a young graduate sees factories built in Asia with African resources, while jobs at home vanish? The hunger becomes unbearable. The people no longer care about theories. They want results. And they want them now. This is why Traoré's rise feels less like politics and more like eruption. A volcano long dormant, finally awake. Even leaders from across Africa cannot ignore it. Duma Boko, a prominent political figure from Botswana, admitted openly, "In my country, a policy can take years to pass through committees and bureaucracy. But Traoré decides in the night, and by morning, it is reality." Sometimes democracy's rules delay so much that the people are left only with hunger and waiting. Those words ignited a storm of debate. Is democracy too slow for a continent where children die waiting for food? Is decisiveness worth more than procedure? Is Traoré the cure, or just another kind of danger dressed in hope? But the truth is this. For the people on the ground, these debates don't matter right now. They are tired of being told to wait. They are tired of sacrifice with no reward. And when a leader looks them in the eye and says, "This wealth is yours, this dignity is yours, this future is yours," they don't care about academic arguments. They care that someone finally dared to act. That is the heart of Traorism fever. It is not about one man. It is about a hunger for justice, for dignity, for ownership. It is the voice of millions who feel robbed by systems too slow, too weak, or too corrupt to defend them. This is why the fever is spreading. From Burkina Faso to Mali, from Niger to the youth of Senegal and Ghana, the cry is the same. Why can't our leaders be bold like Traoré? And that question, dangerous, electric, unrelenting, is echoing across the continent. If you ask any African elder about the continent's greatest enemy, most will name the dictator, the strongman in uniform who silences dissent, the ruler who clings to power for 30 years while his people starve, the tyrant who crushes protests with bullets. But today, in the streets of Ouagadougou, in the markets of Bamako, in the villages of Niamey, a different whisper is spreading. The real enemy is not the dictator. The real enemy is the delay. What do they mean by delay? It is not just about waiting in line or about paperwork that moves too slowly. Delay in Africa is a poison that seeps into every crack of daily life. It is the school that takes 10 years to build while an entire generation grows up illiterate. It is the hospital promised in campaign after campaign that never moves beyond a cement foundation. It is the road that politicians cut ribbons on but never complete, leaving villages isolated and farmers unable to bring their crops to market. Delay is the policy written in shining words but buried in dusty drawers. Delay is the foreign aid that arrives with fanfare but vanishes into corruption before it ever reaches the people. And while the leaders delay, the people die. A child cannot delay hunger. A mother cannot delay medicine. A farmer cannot delay rain. Life demands urgency, but politics answers with excuses. This is why Traore's actions, swift and uncompromising, feel so radical. He is not the first African leader to denounce exploitation, but he may be the first in decades to move with the speed of hunger itself. He does not speak of tomorrow. He speaks of today. The fever of Traorism is born in this contrast. On one side, leaders who promise reform in due time, who say change must come step by step, who insist that the people must be patient. On the other side, a captain who says, enough. The time is now. The world outside often misunderstands this hunger for immediacy. Western commentators shake their heads and say, democracy is slow. That is its strength. Progress must take time. But to the young man in Burkina Faso who cannot find work, taking time sounds like another way of saying never. To the mother in Niger who loses her child because the hospital was delayed another year, slow progress is indistinguishable from betrayal. This is why delay feels more cruel than dictatorship. The dictator is obvious. His crimes are visible. But delay wears a mask. Delay pretends to be care. Delay pretends to be process. Delay says, we are working on it. And yet, nothing changes. It is this quiet violence, the violence of inaction, that drives millions toward anyone bold enough to act. Even if the action is risky, even if it is imperfect, people would rather have a leader who moves and fails than a leader who never moves at all. And so, the fever spreads. Not because Traore has performed miracles, but because he has declared war on delay itself. Every speech he gives, every policy he signs, carries the same message. We will no longer wait. We will no longer ask. We will no longer beg. To outsiders, it may look like nationalism. To the people living it, it feels like breath after suffocation. But here lies the paradox. Delay has been Africa's greatest curse, but speed can also be its greatest danger. Decisions made in haste can burn as quickly as they inspire. The line between urgency and recklessness is thin. And this is the question now hanging over the continent. Will Traorism cure the disease of delay, or will it create a new fever that consumes everything in its path? For now, one thing is certain. Africa's people are no longer willing to wait. The days of patience are over. The ground beneath the palaces of slow-moving presidents is trembling. And in that trembling, a warning is clear. The people are done with delay. For decades, Africa was told a story written in foreign capitals and carried by diplomats, NGOs, and textbooks. The story went like this. Dictators are your problem. Democracy is your solution. Once you adopt elections, freedom, and constitutions, prosperity will follow. It was a neat narrative, a simple recipe. Remove the strongman. Add the ballot box. Wait for progress. But today, across the continent, that story feels like a cruel joke. Because the dictators left, at least some of them, but the hunger stayed. Constitutions were written, but corruption grew fatter. Ballot boxes were filled, but the hospitals remained empty. Presidents were elected, yet they ruled like kings, changing laws to stay in power, while their people sank deeper into poverty. What good is democracy? The people asked, when the result is the same suffering, only wrapped in different words. What good is a vote if it does not bring food to the table or books to the classroom? In the villages, democracy feels like a play staged for the cameras. Politicians arrive in convoys, waving from tinted windows, promising roads, water, schools. The elections come. Votes are counted. And then, silence. The politicians disappear until the next cycle. The promises gather dust. The people are left to fend for themselves. And here lies the great betrayal. Democracy, in theory, is about the people's power. But in practice, in too many African nations, it became the people's delay. It became the tool for keeping them quiet, patient, waiting for miracles that never arrive. So when young leaders like Traore rise and declare, "We will no longer play by this script," millions listen. Not because they reject freedom, but because they reject false freedom. They are tired of democracy that looks like a theater, but feels like a prison. Across Africa, a generation is asking the forbidden question: what if democracy, as it was imported to us, is not the cure? What if it has become part of the disease? The answer terrifies the West. Because if democracy loses its sacred aura, if people stop believing that the ballot box is the only path to justice, then the entire world order begins to shake. But can anyone really blame them? Consider the young graduate in Burkina Faso. He studies for years, believing education will open doors. But when he graduates, there are no jobs. The government tells him to wait, that growth is coming, that democracy takes time. He waits, while his dreams rot. Consider the farmer in Mali. Each rainy season, his harvest shrinks because of droughts worsened by climate change. He goes to the government for help. They tell him there are programs, funds, aid, but they never reach him. He watches his children go hungry. He watches democracy deliver nothing but paperwork. Consider the woman in Niger. Her village has no clinic. Her child falls ill. The local politicians cut ribbons on new hospitals in the city, smiling for cameras, but in her village, nothing arrives. She buries her child before his 5th birthday. She asks, "What has democracy done for me?" This is why Traore's words cut so deep. He does not stand before his people and speak in the language of delay. He does not hide behind the excuse of process. He does not say, "Be patient." Instead, he says, "Enough. We will build. We will act. We will take back what is ours." And the people, weary of waiting, respond with thunderous applause. To them, his boldness feels like justice. His defiance feels like dignity. But with this fire comes danger. Because tearing down a broken system is not the same as building a better one. The fever of Traorism burns brightly, but fire consumes as easily as it warms. Will this new path bring true freedom, or simply a new mask over the same chains? For now, the continent has made its choice. It would rather risk the fire of boldness than suffocate in the smoke of broken promises. The age of patience is over. The age of questioning has begun. And democracy, once untouchable, now stands trial in the court of Africa's hungry and restless youth. In the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, Niamey, something remarkable has happened. The figure once feared, once hidden in the shadows of coups and barracks, has stepped back into the sunlight. The soldier. For years, the West told Africa that the military belonged only in its barracks. That soldiers were meant to defend borders, not lead nations. That generals in politics meant only dictatorship, repression, and blood. And indeed, Africa's history offered painful proof. Strong men who clung to power, armies that silenced critics, regimes that crushed their people while enriching their elites. But today, the story has twisted. Because now, when the soldier marches into power, he is not met with fear, but with celebration. Crowds cheer in the squares. Youth wave flags. Women ululate. To them, the soldier does not look like the ghost of tyranny. He looks like the answer to delay. Why? Because unlike the politician, the soldier does not speak the language of endless promises. He speaks the language of urgency, of command, of action. Where politicians say, "We will study," the soldier says, "We will do." Where the government says, "We are waiting for aid," the soldier says, "We will take it into our hands." In Burkina Faso, when Traore appeared in uniform, young enough to be the son of the old rulers, he carried himself with the gravity of a man twice his age. His words struck like thunder. Our people have waited long enough. We will no longer kneel before those who exploit us. We will no longer obey orders from Paris or Washington. We will chart our own path. The people erupted Because here, at last, was a leader who did not beg, but defy, who did not speak as a servant, but as a sovereign. It is a strange reversal of history. Once, the West feared Africa's dictators, but trusted Africa's democrats. Now, the people distrust the democrats and embrace the defiant soldier. To them, the uniform has become a symbol not of oppression, but of protection, not of chains, but of shields. And yet, we must ask, why does the soldier inspire such faith? Perhaps because the people believe only the military has the discipline to resist corruption, the strength to confront foreign powers, the will to fight the terrorist insurgencies that politicians ignore. Perhaps because, in a world of delay, the soldier represents urgency. But history whispers its warning. For every soldier who rose with noble words, many fell to the temptations of power. Many who promised dignity delivered only silence. Many who vowed to serve the people ended up ruling them with fear. This is the gamble of Africa's new revolution. When the people place their trust in the soldier, they are betting that this time will be different. That this generation of leaders will not repeat the sins of the past. That the fever of Traorism will cure, not consume. Already, the signs are powerful. In Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, soldiers turned leaders have torn down the old order. They expelled French troops. They rejected Western dictates. They formed new alliances, promising to build Africa's strength with African hands. The West watches in alarm, whispering about coups, instability, and illegitimacy. But on the ground, the people celebrate. To them, legitimacy does not come from a ballot box managed by corrupt elites. It comes from courage, from defiance, from leaders who stand before the world and say, "We will no longer be slaves." This return of the soldier is not merely political. It is spiritual. For decades, Africans were told that their salvation would come from outside, from aid, from advisors, from international programs. Now they are told, it will come from us, from our sons and daughters, from the very soil we stand on. That shift, that turning inward, is why the soldier has become more than a ruler. He has become a symbol, a reminder that Africa's fate will no longer be dictated, but decided. Still, symbols cannot feed children. Defiance cannot build hospitals. Courage cannot pave roads. The soldier may inspire the people today, but the true test will come tomorrow, when the fever fades and the hunger returns. Will these new leaders deliver more than speeches? Will they build where others delayed? Will they give Africa not just pride, but prosperity? This is the question that hangs like a storm cloud over the continent. For now, the soldier marches, the crowds cheer, and the old order trembles. But history watches, waiting to see whether this return of the soldier will be remembered as liberation or as betrayal. But revolutions do not happen in silence. And when Captain Traore raised his voice, the echo shook the halls of Paris, Washington, and Brussels. The West had always seen Africa as a partner in words, but as a possession in practice. For decades, French troops claimed to protect Burkina Faso from terror, yet the terror only grew. Billions of dollars in aid flowed in, but schools still collapsed, roads still crumbled, and hospitals still lacked medicine. So when Traore expelled French soldiers, it was more than a military decision. It was a political earthquake. For the first time in years, a young African leader told a former colonial master, "Leave. We will fight our own battles." The response was swift. Western media branded him a dangerous populist, a reckless soldier, an inexperienced boy playing with fire. Editorials painted him as another African strongman, no different from the dictators of the past. Sanctions were whispered. Warnings were issued. He was suspended. But for the people, none of this mattered, because they remembered something the West preferred to forget. The years when gold, cotton, cocoa, and oil left African soil, while hunger stayed behind. They remembered French companies that mined uranium in Niger while millions there lived in the dark without electricity. They remembered the IMF and World Bank loans that came with chains tighter than any soldier's grip. Traore called it out without hesitation. He stood before the African Union and declared that colonialism never truly ended, it simply changed its face. He accused the West of fighting terrorism with one hand while fueling it with the other. He asked why African blood always seemed to pay for foreign profits. And suddenly, what had begun as one man's defiance turned into a wave of solidarity. From Mali to Niger, governments echoed his demands. From Senegal to Chad, young people raised his portrait in protest squares. Across the diaspora, Africans in Paris, London, and New York said, "Finally, someone is speaking our truth." But the clash with the West is not just about soldiers and speeches. It is about a deeper question. Can Africa stand on its own feet without being punished for it? Can a continent that has fed the world, powered the world, enriched the world, finally claim dignity for itself? And this is why the fever grows. Because every sanction, every warning, every smear only confirms what Traore's supporters already believe, that the system was never built for Africa to rise. That the very speed he represents is the antidote to a delay designed to keep Africa waiting forever. The West may have its armies, its banks, its newspapers. But Traorism fever has something far more dangerous. The belief that Africa's time is now. The fever that began in Ouagadougou did not stop at Burkina Faso's borders. It spread like fire across the Sahel, a region scarred by endless conflict but bound by a shared pain. Mali, Niger, Guinea, each of them bruised by coups, sanctions, and foreign meddling, found in Traore's words a mirror of their own struggles. And so, an alliance was born. Not one written in neat treaties or polished in diplomatic halls, but one forged in the dust of battlefields and the roar of protest squares. They called it the Alliance of Sahel States, a pact not of convenience, but of survival. For decades, the idea of African unity had been spoken in conferences, praised in speeches, and celebrated in slogans. But for the first time in generations, it was felt in the marrow of the people. Ordinary citizens, farmers, market women, and students began chanting the same slogans across borders. Africa for Africans. No more colonizers. Our destiny, our hands. This alliance was not just military. It was psychological. It broke the chains of isolation that each country once carried alone. When the West sanctioned Burkina Faso, Mali extended its hand. When Niger expelled French forces, Guinea cheered. Suddenly, the punishment of one became the resistance of all. But alliances are not only about defense, they are also about vision. And in dusty government halls, young ministers and generals began to dream out loud. Could they trade with each other without the permission of Paris? Could they build roads that connected Sahel to Sahel instead of Sahel to Europe? Could they one day mint a currency not stamped with French signatures, but African pride? The fever of Traorism gave them courage to believe so. Yet the alliance also brought danger, because unity is the one thing colonial powers fear most. For centuries, Africa was divided, by borders drawn in European capitals, by ethnic rivalries fueled by outsiders, by leaders bribed to look the other way. If the alliance survived, if it grew, if it gained legitimacy, then the balance of power would tilt. Africa would no longer beg for crumbs. It would demand a seat at the table or build its own. And so, pressure mounted. Intelligence agencies moved quietly. Propaganda swirled. Whispers of coups within coups began to circulate. Western diplomats warned of destabilization, but Africans heard the echo of an old threat. Do not rise too high. Do not move too fast, or we will bring you down. But the fever is stubborn. In football stadiums, children wore shirts with Traore's image. In classrooms, students debated whether a United States of Africa could finally be real. In the streets, young men shouted, "If one leader falls, 10 more will rise." The African alliance was fragile, yes, but it was also historic. For the first time, Africans were not waiting for the West to define their destiny. They were writing their own story. And that, perhaps, is the greatest threat to the old order. Because once a people begin to imagine freedom together, no empire can keep them apart forever. The fever of Traorism burned bright, but like all fevers, it carried a question. Would it heal the body of Africa, or consume it? In Ouagadougou, young men painted murals of Traore standing tall, his beret glowing like a flame in the night. They sang songs about freedom, about dignity, about a continent rising from its knees. The fever gave them hope. It gave them strength. It gave them pride. But fever alone cannot rebuild nations. Fever cannot pave roads, nor plant fields, nor keep the lights on in hospitals. Fever cannot balance budgets, nor calm hungry children crying in the night. And so, while the crowds roared in the streets, mothers whispered a quieter truth. We need more than slogans. We need bread. The fever was a spark. But could it become a fire strong enough to melt the chains? That depended not only on Traore, but on the people themselves. Because history is not changed by one man, it is carried by millions. Africa has seen this fire before. In Ghana, when Kwame Nkrumah declared independence, people believed a golden dawn had arrived. In Tanzania, Julius Nyerere spoke of self-reliance, of building a nation without masters. In Burkina Faso itself, Thomas Sankara lit a torch of revolution, teaching that a country could feed itself, heal itself, defend itself. But one by one, those flames were smothered by assassinations, by coups, by sanctions, by betrayals. And so, the fever of Traorism carries both the dream and the warning. Without discipline, without vision, without unity, the fever will break, and Africa will return to its chains. This is why every speech, every decision, every act of defiance matters. Because the fever is fragile. It must grow into an unshakable fire, an idea too powerful to be killed, too vast to be silenced. And so, the choice stands before the people of Africa. Will they rise together and turn this fever into a cleansing fire? Or will they allow the old empires to douse it once more, leaving behind only ashes and forgotten songs? The fever has begun. The fire waits. In Africa today, the people's greatest enemy is not the dictator. It is the delay. Delay has stolen more futures than guns. It is the reason why children born with brilliance never see classrooms. It is the reason why farmers, strong in their hands and spirit, watch their harvests rot while ships bring food from abroad. It is the reason why hospitals remain half-built, why lights flicker in the cities, why villages wait decades for clean water. A dictator can be overthrown. A tyrant can be named and fought. A delay is invisible. It seeps into every corner of life, stretching minutes into years, turning promises into graves. And the cruelest truth of all is this: every generation that delays passes its burden to the next. Today's child grows up in the shadow of yesterday's unfinished work. Roads that were planned 20 years ago still lie on paper. Schools that were promised 10 years ago stand as empty shells. Governments rise and fall, but the delay remains, wearing new masks, making new excuses. And so the fever of Traorism faces its greatest test, not only to speak against foreign masters or corrupt leaders, but to defeat delay itself. Because delay is the quiet killer, the silent thief of nations. The people know this. They whisper it when the power cuts out at night. They see it when their children carry buckets to fetch water instead of books to carry knowledge. They feel it when elections pass and nothing changes. And so the question burns hotter than ever. Can this movement break the chains of delay? Or will Africa once again wait and wait until the waiting becomes another word for surrender? If delay is the greatest enemy, then the greatest weapon against it is the youth. Across Africa, it is not the old men in suits who carry the future. It is the millions of young men and women whose average age is less than 20. They are the heartbeat of this continent, restless, impatient, unwilling to inherit only broken promises. These youth do not fear the language of revolution. They do not bow easily to authority. They look at their countries and see that they are rich in gold, diamonds, oil, and land, yet poor in opportunity. They ask, why should a farmer's child go hungry while the soil beneath his feet feeds the world? Why should a miner's son walk barefoot while the minerals he digs out build skyscrapers in foreign lands? In the streets of Ouagadougou, in Kinshasa, in Lagos, in Nairobi, the youth are marching, demanding, refusing silence. They are the ones who cheer for Traore, not because he is perfect, but because he dares to speak their frustration aloud. He tells them that Africa's wealth must not only be defended, it must be owned by Africans. But here lies both power and danger. For youth are fire, and fire can warm, but it can also destroy. If their energy is not channeled into building schools, industries, and systems that last, it will explode in rage. The fever of Traorism could spread into a blaze that burns down everything, including hope itself. This is why delay is deadly. Delay suffocates youth, turning energy into anger, dreams into despair. And a young man without work, a young woman without opportunity, does not simply sit idle. She rises, she resists, she demands. The question then is not whether Africa's youth will rise. The question is, when they rise, will there be leaders brave enough, disciplined enough, visionary enough, to guide their fire into light and not into ashes? Africa now stands at a crossroad. On one path lies the temptation of delay, the endless meetings, the endless speeches, the endless waiting for foreign aid that never comes without chains. This is the old road, the road of broken promises, the road where generations die waiting for tomorrow. On the other path lies urgency. It is harder, it is riskier, but it is the only way forward. Urgency means building industries now, even if imperfect. Urgency means educating every child today, not promising them schools 10 years from now. Urgency means refusing contracts that rob Africa, even if it means hardship in the short term. This is what leaders like Traore have understood. That time is no longer Africa's friend. Every day wasted is another mine empty, another forest cut, another child lost to despair. Delay does not simply slow progress, it kills it. And so, Africa must choose. Will it remain the continent of potential, always tomorrow, never today? Or will it seize the moment, take control of its resources, its destiny, and its voice in the world? History is watching. The youth are watching. The future is waiting. And delay, the greatest enemy, cannot be allowed to win. Africa's story has always been told by others, by colonizers, by corporations, by distant capitals that see this land not as a home, but as a resource. For centuries, the narrative was the same. Africa is rich, but its people are poor. Africa is vast, but its destiny is small. But now, a new chapter is being written, not with ink, but with defiance. Not with delay, but with urgency. The rise of leaders like Ibrahim Traoré is not just about Burkina Faso. It is about an awakening across the continent. An awakening that says, enough waiting, enough begging, enough delay. The future will not come to Africa as a gift. It must be taken, built, fought for. It will come through the courage of those who refuse to accept crumbs while their land overflows with gold, oil, and diamonds. It will come through the voices of young people demanding jobs, justice, and dignity, not in the distant future, but now. Yes, there are risks. Yes, there will be mistakes. But the greater risk is silence. The greater danger is delay. Because delay robs not just opportunities, it robs generations. So let this be the call. Africa must act. Africa must rise. Africa must refuse to be patient any longer. The age of waiting is over. And when history asks what this generation chose, whether to live in the shadow of delay or to seize the urgency of action, let the answer be clear. Let the world say, Africa chose today.